Some Pokemon cards are designed to look clean, balanced, almost perfect. And then there's Tomokazu Komiya, an artist whose cards honestly look like they shouldn't even work, but somehow have become some of the most recognizable artworks in the entire Pokemon TCG. And whether people love his artwork or completely hate it, almost everybody remembers it. Because when you look at a Komiya card, it doesn't really look like anybody else's work. Today, we're talking about Tomokazu Komiya, one of the most unique illustrators Pokemon has ever had. And if you've been around Pokemon cards long enough, you've definitely seen his work before, even if you didn't know his name. Because Komiya's style stands out immediately. The colors feel chaotic, the perspectives feel weird, the proportions sometimes barely even make sense, and honestly, that's exactly why so many people love his artwork. But the more I started learning about Komiya as a person, the more his art started to make sense to me. Because behind all the weirdness, he actually seems like a really genuine person who just happened to find his thing through drawing. One thing I really found interesting about Komiya is how honest he is about his childhood. He's openly talked about how he wasn't good at studying, wasn't athletic, and honestly, he felt like he wasn't very good at anything, except drawing. Art was the one thing he actually took seriously, and the one thing people recognized him for. I think that explains a lot about his artwork, because his cards don't feel overly polished or corporate. They just feel personal. Like somebody genuinely having fun creating weird ideas. And what's crazy is, despite becoming one of the most recognizable artists in Pokemon history, Komiya actually failed his art school entrance exam multiple times. Eventually, he ended up going to vocational school instead. But according to him, the main thing he learned there was alcohol, which honestly feels like the most Komiya answer possible. Komiya started illustrating for Pokemon back in the late 90s, making him one of the longest running artists in the entire TCG. Some of his earliest cards showed up in the 1998 vending series, with cards like Weedle, Doduo, and Chansey. And even back then, his cards already felt different from everything else around them. They weren't trying to look realistic, they weren't trying to look perfect, they just felt expressive. Almost like a really talented kid drew them, but completely on purpose. And over the last 30 years, we've basically been able to watch Komiya's style evolve alongside Pokemon itself. The best way I can describe Komiya's artwork is honestly just like controlled chaos. The colors are loud, the perspectives feel warped, the proportions feel exaggerated, and everything just feels slightly off, but somehow in the best way possible. And unlike a lot of modern Pokemon artists, Komiya's work is entirely handmade. He uses traditional materials like watercolor and gouache, and gives the cards this extremely textured look. You can almost feel the artwork by just looking at it. And I think that's part of why his cards stand out so much now. Because in an era where so much artwork feels super polished and digital, Komiya's art still feels rough, messy, human. A lot of Pokemon artwork tries to make Pokemon look cool. Komiya's art feels way more focused on personality, expression, movement, and energy. His cards don't always feel realistic, but they feel alive. And one thing I learned from an interview with him is that he doesn't really sit there trying to create some perfect artistic environment. He said a lot of his ideas just randomly come to him while walking around or talking to people. And later he tries figuring out how to turn that feeling into artwork, which honestly explains his cards perfectly. Because Komiya's art feels emotional first and logical second. And honestly, Komiya is one of those artists where people either completely love the artwork or absolutely hate it. There's really no middle ground. Some people think his cards look ugly, weird, or messy. Other people think they're some of the most creative cards Pokemon has ever printed. But honestly, that's usually how you know an artist has a real style, because you can recognize a Komiya card almost instantly, even from across the room. And the funny thing is, Komiya himself is fully aware that his artwork feels different. In an interview, he even joked that when people look back at old Pokemon cards years from now, he will probably be remembered as quote unquote those weird ones. And honestly, he's probably right. But I think that's exactly why people remember them. Take something like the Scarlet and Violet Drowzee. The first time you see that card, it almost feels uncomfortable to look at. The colors are strange, the proportions feel distorted, everything about it feels slightly off. But that's exactly why it sticks in your head. Or cards like Eevee and Snorlax GX. There's so much personality packed into the artwork. The poses feel exaggerated, the expressions feel weirdly alive, and the entire card feels like it's moving. Even older cards like the Dark Slowking from Neo Destiny, or Ditto from Skyridge, still instantly feel like Komiya cards. And when you compare those older cards to newer ones like the Gengar from 151, you can actually see how his style has evolved over time. The chaos became more controlled, more dynamic, more intentional. One thing I really love about Komiya's artwork too is the little Pokemon cameos hidden throughout his illustrations. A lot of his cards don't just feel like drawings of Pokemon. They feel like weird little worlds Pokemon are actually living in. And honestly, the more you learn about Komiya as a person, the more it makes sense. Even in his personal artwork, he talks about recurring animals and characters that randomly appearing throughout his paintings. At one point, he even said the penguins in his artwork represent the cowardly side of him, which is honestly such a weirdly specific thing to say, but also somehow relatable. What makes Komiya even more interesting is that at one point, he actually tried drawing in a more traditional Pokemon style, but eventually, he realized something important. People didn't want Komiya to look like everybody else. They wanted Komiya to look like Komiya. And honestly, I think that's a huge reason his artwork became so memorable. Because even when his cards look strange, they still feel authentic. Komiya has even said he doesn't really have some huge artistic ambition or anything like that. He just wants to create things that make people happy when they see them. And honestly, I think he's done just that. Komiya has illustrated over 276 Pokemon cards, along with more than 30 cards appearing in the Pokemon TCG Pocket. He also contributed artwork to the Pokemon X Fan Go collaboration with pieces like Sunflowers featuring Sunflora and Self-Portrait as a Painter featuring Smeargle. He was also one of the judges for the 2022 Pokemon Illustration Contest alongside artists like Akira Igawa and Koki Saito. Outside of Pokemon, he's worked on Duel Masters, illustrated Pokemon Tales children's books, and even became known for purposely keeping his autographs rare. And despite being one of the most recognizable artists in Pokemon history, he still comes across as surprisingly humble. Kind of awkward in a way. But I think that awkwardness is just a part of what makes the artwork feel genuine. And honestly, and that's why I personally love Komiya's artwork so much. Because his cards remind me that Pokemon art doesn't always need to look perfect to be memorable. A lot of his artwork feels bizarre at first, almost chaotic. But the longer you look at it, the more personality you start noticing. And the older I get, the more I appreciate artists willing to create something unique, instead of just trying to make everything look the same like everybody else. Next time you pull a Tomokazu Komiya card, don't just glance at it and move on. Actually stop and look at it. Look at the colors. Look at the textures. Look at all the strange little details hidden throughout the artwork. Because whether you love his style or completely hate it, there's a really good chance you're still going to remember it. I really hope you guys were able to learn something from today's video. If you were, please give us a like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys a ton, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.